Tonight, cold, hungry but alive. A teenage boy missing for 2 nights in freezing conditions reunited with his family.
Thank you everyone. I'm so grateful. You're all amazing.
Good evening, I'm Juanita Phillips. This is ABC News. Another small step back to normal. Adult sport allowed to resume from next month. George Floyd laid to rest in his hometown more than 2 weeks after his death sparked global protests. And the perils of a lockdown hobby, a warning for new day traders hoping to make a fortune on the stock market. Well, after a terrible year, it's the good news story that has the whole country rejoicing. A young boy missing in freezing temperatures for 2 nights is tonight back with his relieved parents. 14-year-old WilliamCallaghan, who has non-verbal autism, was found by a volunteer at Mount Disappointment, north of Melbourne. And the first thing William wanted was his favourite fast food.
Lost in the wild for 2 bitterly cold nights, but WilliamCallaghan's family refused to give up hope of finding their boy alive and well. At noon, their hopes were answered.
Thank you everyone. I'm so grateful. You're all amazing.
He's alert, warm, eating and drinking, and he actually asked for McDonald's.
More than 400 searchers threw every resource they had at finding the 14-year-old, scouring Mount Disappointment and surrounding farmland on Melbourne's outskirts.
We were all just wanting to get as much ground covered as we could.
Looking for a teenager with autism who can't talk added an extra layer of complexity to a monumental task. Those living nearby were urged to fire up their barbecues in the hope of encouraging the food-loving boy to safety. Other unusual tactics were also used.
We have 3 PAs around the search area playing Thomas the Tank Engine.
In the end, this volunteer came across the 14-year-old only about a kilometre from the staging ground, close to an area that had been earlier covered. Ben Gibbs has been coming up to the mountain since he was a boy. He managed to spot William through the thick bush. He was barefoot and only wearing the jumper and track pants he put on 3 days ago.
Just standing there, he was really angelic, just standing and looking.
I can't imagine what he's been feeling and going through, and I'm just so grateful and so relieved.
I'm the one who stumbled across him, but everybody found him, all of the volunteers.
Well, there's plenty of relief and joy amongst the rank and file in the rescue teams here. Many have been out all night, multiple days, long hours in the cold, and they're finally getting to sit down, get some hot food and rejoice after a very successful rescue mission, proving why you don't give up in these kinds of situations.
It's absolutely fantastic.
He's just a very special person, and all the people in his life, they love him to bits.
Iskandar Razak, ABC News, Mount Disappointment.
The Deputy Premier appears to have taken an extraordinary swipe at Gladys Berejiklian over the pace of easing restrictions. John Barilaro says it's time for leadership and that all COVID restrictions should be lifted. But the Premier insists she is staying the course and she'll continue to rely on the official health advice. One more change that is coming: all adult community sport can resume from the beginning of July. Here's State political reporter Ashley Raper.
Back on court to salvage a season.
Sport's really important to this community. It really is the lifeblood of the town, I feel.
From July the 1st, adult community sport will make a comeback to coincide with the return of the children's competition, a boost to the viability of local clubs and codes.
Everybody's registration is important to us, and in order to make us work, we need everybody to be able to play.
Whether people will be able to watch is still being debated, as it is with professional sport.
It is an empty stadium tonight as far as fans are concerned.
This weekend, NRL and AFL fans will return. Corporate boxes at stadiums will be treated like pubs and restaurants, and up to 50 people will be allowed per box to watch. But the Deputy Premier wants fans back in the grandstands too.
Well, if you've got ANZ Stadium that fits 80,000 people, and you apply social distancing rules, you could probably get up to 30 or 40,000 people.
It's John Barilaro's position, not government policy.
We just have to make sure we do it at the right time, and obviously we're relying on good health advice.
The Deputy Premier is advising that it's also time to lift all restrictions.
At some point, you've got to make a leadership decision, a decision of government to say, when do we restore and recover and get to some level of normality? I think we're at that point.
The Premier doesn't, and this freelancing by the Deputy Premier is undermining her message that New South Wales needs to be patient and stay the course, especially when Gladys Berejiklian acknowledges there is growing frustration about particular restrictions remaining in place.
We need a clear roadmap out of COVID-19. It's quite clear that the New South Wales Government, the Premier and her ministers cannot deliver that.
Today marks 2 weeks without any community transmission of COVID-19. That may make it even harder for the Premier to prosecute the case for delaying the further easing of restrictions. Ashley Raper, ABC News.
The federal government says it will not boot any more workers off the JobKeeper program before the scheme is reviewed next month. Childcare workers will lose their JobKeeper payments from July the 20th. Federal Parliament resumed today, but some Labor MPs weren't there. They were self-isolating after attending the weekend's Black Lives Matter protest. Political editor Andrew Probyn is at Parliament House.
Australia's Black Lives Matter protest was subject to the Prime Ministerial decree.
I say to them, don't go.
But tens of thousands did.
The people can march!
Despite bipartisan anxiety about mass gatherings.
You should always follow health advice.
4 of Anthony Albanese's Labor colleagues went to the rallies.
I went to that protest because it's something I care passionately about.
All are now in self-isolation, awaiting tests for COVID-19.
They followed the health advice, and now they're, out of an abundance of caution, being tested.
2 Green senators also attended.
I'm following the advice of the Chief Medical Officer, who said that it wasn't necessary to self-isolate.
But authorities are assessing what effect, if any, the protests will have on the reopening of the economy.
We have to wait and see, as a result of the mass gatherings, what the impact will be.
The economic impact of COVID-19 is already clear.
It is a recession, Mr Speaker. There's no doubt about that.
But there's a growing sense the government wants the way out of the shutdown to be sped up, including, it seems, making more adjustments to the JobKeeper wage subsidy scheme, which runs until September.
But where there is a better way to do things, we won't step aside from doing them in a better way.
It wasn't that long ago that Scott Morrison was saying in this country, if you have a go, you get a go. Well, now he's saying to so many workers, you've had a go, now off you go to Centrelink.
An economic statement set down for July 23rd looks more and more like a mini budget. The childcare sector's early exit from JobKeeper may not be the only change to the scheme when a review's completed later this month. But if more sectors are weaned off earlier, others, including tourism, stand to have some kind of support extended. Andrew Probyn, ABC News, Canberra.
China has delivered another blow to Australia's economy, this time targeting universities. It's warning its citizens to be wary about studying here because of the risk of racist attacks. China has already punished the beef, barley and tourism sectors as part of its diplomatic row with Australia. Here's political reporter Jane Norman.
Bashed in a Melbourne laneway. 2 Chinese students set upon by their attackers, reportedly shouting coronavirus and telling them to get out of our country. Images captured on CCTV and weaponised by China's CCP.
Geopolitics is a major factor. Unfortunately, the higher education sector has been caught in the middle of this yet again.
Beijing appears to be using a series of racist incidents to once again inflict economic pain on Australia. Its Ministry of Education warning China's vast contingent of overseas students to be cautious of choosing or going to study in Australia, citing numerous cases of discrimination against Asians.
Well, we disagree with it. Australia is an open and welcoming country.
Officially, racism-related complaints to police and human rights groups have surged during the COVID crisis. Anecdotally, some Asian Australians say they've been targeted and taunted.
Unfortunately, racism and racist attitudes have been on the increase.
I think those incidences are the actions of a tiny minority of cowardly idiots.
Valued at more than $30 billion a year, international education is Australia's third biggest export industry behind iron ore and coal, and Victoria's largest. Of the 600,000 international students studying here, 175,000 or 30% are from China. This over-reliance on foreign students leaving universities massively exposed. China's latest warning comes in the midst of a deepening diplomatic stoush. Universities aren't expecting any immediate impact though, because most of the foreign students enrolled are already here in Australia. There will be a longer-term impact though, if the need to comply with the state outweighs the desire of Chinese families for a Western education for their children. Jane Norman, ABC News, Canberra.
Our China correspondent Bill Birtles is in Beijing and he's been watching this issue unfold. Bill, are Chinese families likely to heed the government's warning and keep their kids away from Australian unis?
Well, Juanita, we've been speaking to several Chinese education agents over here today. These are the intermediaries who help connect many Chinese students with Australian universities. They say, on the contrary, it's pretty much business as usual. They're taking applications for next year. They say this issue of racism in Australia has been well known for a long time. It's nothing new. But what they did say is there's been a huge drop-off in the number of applications for US universities because of the increasing tension with Washington and the much worse coronavirus situation. These agents say many families who were considering sending their children to American unis are now looking at Britain and Australia. And it's well known in China that Australia's coronavirus situation is far better than the UK. So for these reasons, and also the various diplomatic stoushes that China is having with all these other Western nations, this may serve, Juanita, to undermine any effort here to harm the appeal of Australian education to Chinese students.
Bill Birtles with the latest there from Beijing. Family and friends of George Floyd have gathered to celebrate his life at his funeral in Houston, Texas. In emotional tributes, they remembered him personally, but also implored Americans to continue the quest for justice. Hundreds watched as his hearse was led away, but the funeral also acted as a moment of reckoning across the US and the world. Chief Foreign Correspondent Philip Williams reports from Los Angeles.
The protests around the world were hushed, for this was a day for one family to grieve for the man they knew simply as Big George. A father of three, an uncle and a brother.
All I think about is when he was yelling for mama. I know how mama is. She's just right there. She got her hands wide open. Come here, baby. Every mama felt that.
As well as the tears, there was anger and a demand that his death will mean real change.
No more hate crimes, please. Someone said make America great again, but when has America ever been great?
George Floyd's image was recreated. Memories are all that's left for the family, and a burning demand that his legacy will be a nation of equals.
Until we know the price for black life is the same as the price for white life, we're going to keep coming back to these situations over and over again.
President Trump was not invited. His Democrat rival Joe Biden met the family the day before and sent this video message.
We must not turn away. We cannot leave this moment thinking we can once again turn away from racism that stings at our very soul.
On his final journey, the man who was killed by a policeman was honoured with a police escort. Buried next to his beloved mother, whose name he called out in anguish just moments before he died. That intense emotion will only add to the determination of protesters who vowed to keep up the pressure for real change. The next few days will be a test of the strength of their resolve, and the focus will return to Washington, where the Democrats are talking reform of police practices, the President talking tough on law and order. Philip Williams, ABC News, Los Angeles.
Just hours before George Floyd's funeral, the US President tweeted an unsubstantiated conspiracy theory about a 75-year-old protester who was injured in Buffalo. Donald Trump wrote that the demonstrator who was shoved by police could be a member of the anti-fascist movement Antifa, and that he fell harder than he was pushed. The New York governor said he was disgusted by the tweet.
If he ever feels a moment of decency, he should apologize for that tweet, because it is wholly unacceptable. Not a piece of proof, totally personally disparaging, and in a moment where the man is still in the hospital.
2 police officers have been suspended and charged with assault over the incident. The campaign to remove monuments connected to Britain's colonial past is gathering pace, with the Mayor of London announcing an audit of the city's landmarks. On the weekend, anti-racism protesters in Bristol tore down the statue of slave trader Edward Colston. And at Oxford University, some want the statue of imperialist Cecil Rhodes removed too. Europe correspondent Linton Besser reports.
These students believe the moment has finally come to reconsider Britain's heroes of the past, especially diamond tycoon and fervent coloniser Cecil Rhodes.
Rhodes' legacy in Southern Africa is one of genocide, of exploitation, of subjugation. He laid the foundations of the skewed labour systems that we see, the seizure of lands, particularly in South Africa.
In 2015, his statue was removed from the University of Cape Town in recognition of the institutional racism that Rhodes championed.
No justice!
Since then, the campaign to do the same at Oxford has only grown. 26 members of Oxford Council have joined the call for its removal. The Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, has announced a sweeping review of the city's landmarks.
We shouldn't be memorialising, we shouldn't be commemorating, celebrating as icons people who are slavers, plantation owners.
As a black man, to walk past something like that, do you know how demoralising that is?
Some are moving even faster. Britain's Canal and River Trust brought in a crane to dismantle this statue, which had memorialised 18th century Scottish trader and slave owner Robert Milligan. It's not just Britain. In Belgium, the statue of a former monarch was defaced and then removed. King Leopold II's brutal reign in the now Democratic Republic of Congo left millions dead. Europe might be thousands of kilometres from where George Floyd was killed, but from Geneva to Paris to London, his death has become a beacon for change. Linton Besser, ABC News, London.
Still to come this hour, the Australians feeling the bite of unemployment.
You have to be careful that you don't get out of a routine that you're used to.
I had my moment of panicking and feeling really sorry for myself. I had to shake it off pretty quickly. I've got a daughter to raise.
Plus how the AFL's planning to bring back games. That's coming up.
An aspiring Greens politician has appeared in a Sydney court accused of directing and watching live images of child sexual abuse in the Philippines. Jonathan Doig is a software engineer at the University of New South Wales and unsuccessfully ran for the Greens in the Prime Minister's Sydney seat at last year's federal election. Jessie Dorset reports.
I'm Jonathan Doig. I live in Sydney.
Jonathan Doig used the internet to document his public protests.
I don't want my children to be one of those deaths.
But it's his alleged secret activity online that police are pursuing. The 57-year-old is accused of paying to watch and direct live images of child sexual abuse in the Philippines. Police allege he was in daily contact with a 13-year-old Filipina girl right up until yesterday when he was arrested. More than 350 images are alleged to have been sent between the girl and the accused, including child abuse. The court heard investigators uncovered chats with another 5 girls and that Mr Doig sent almost $130,000 to 97 different accounts in the Philippines over the past decade. The prosecutor told the court Mr Doig must have known the 13-year-old's age because he had photos of her in a school uniform and a report card. She said the 57-year-old had an ongoing sexual interest in children and there was a risk of reoffending. Will Jonathan Doig be fighting the charges?
I don't wish to say anything at this point.
But Mr Doig's lawyers said his wife would monitor his conduct from the family home. He was granted bail on the condition that he stay away from the internet and not have any contact with children. Police said they feared more victims will be uncovered on Mr Doig's encrypted computer. The Greens Party has suspended his membership. Jessie Dorset, ABC News, Sydney.
The COVID crisis has prompted many people to look for another way to make money, including trying their hand at the share market. Stocks have been surging since the crash in March, and some first-time investors have made huge gains. But the regulator is worried, warning inexperienced day traders and investors not to get in over their heads.
Australians stranded at home with a new pastime, making money and trading shares. And for some, like 21-year-old Eleanor Wilson, the gains have been spectacular.
I'm up about 35%.
Jack Dempsey comes up with a try. Professional rugby player Jack Dempsey turned to shares to recover his lost income.
We're 2 months into pay cuts, and I've already made back what I would have lost and some more as well.
David Icker is unemployed. He withdrew all his super and invested it himself.
I don't know if anyone really knows what the market's going to do, so I'm not going to pay an advisor to use my money.
And the stocks of choice appear to be in the hard-hit travel and tourism sector. Shares like Qantas and Flight Centre have outperformed the broader market since its collapse. Since March, the number of new accounts opened daily has more than doubled from 1,500 to a peak of 4,500. And the regulator has noticed a worrying pattern emerging.
Basically, 2/3 of the days when retail traders were net buyers, the next day the market went down. And similarly, when they were sellers, the next day the market went up.
ASIC is concerned about inexperienced day traders and suggests getting advice and practicing before committing real money.
For the minute, I'm pretty comfortable with what I've put in and, the results that will come out of that, I think. I'm in it for the long run.
At the very least, it's a life lesson. Philip Lasker, ABC News.
And if you are invested in the stock market, it was another good day. The market recovered from an early fall to finish with its 7th rise in a row. Here's Alan Kohler.
7 trading sessions in June so far and 7 rises totalling 7%. An extraordinary run, especially in the middle of a recession. And not just any old recession. This chart from JP Morgan predicts a 5% fall in global GDP, the same as the Great Depression, and only less than the aftermath of the Second World War. But the market is no longer looking at that part of the graph, but the bit after that, where JP Morgan and most other analysts are predicting a bounce back to boom time growth of plus 5%. So we'll see. But restaurant bookings in Australia are on the way back, currently down 40% from February noshing levels, which is a lot better than the 100% fall of March and April. And the $25,000 building and renovation grant seems to have sparked a tad of interest. This is a graph of the Google search term home renovations. Don't stand between a homeowner and a bag of renovation grant money. After a sharpish fall at the opening and a solid rally to 6,300 during the day, the All Ordinaries finished 0.1% higher, mainly because the biggest company, CSL, jumped 2.6%. The banks and shopping centres, unsurprisingly, had a rest, while Wesfarmers and Afterpay saw the biggest gains in the top 100. The initial fall was off the back of a rare drop in New York, although the Nasdaq Technology Index did power ahead. Gold rose on commodity markets, but silver, iron ore and oil fell, and the Australian dollar remained roughly steady at just under 70 US cents. And that's finance.
It's been a terrific start for this year's winter crops after a string of seasons plagued by drought. New forecasts show grain production is tipped to rise by more than 50% this year. And in the country's grain belts, there are plenty of happy farmers.
Crops are emerging across Victoria's mallee and growers are stoked with the good conditions.
Yeah, we've had a near perfect start this season.
That's thanks to well-timed late summer and autumn rainfall across South Australia, Victoria and New South Wales. Enough for the federal government's commodity forecaster, ABARES, to predict a 50% rise in grain production, from 29 million tonnes last year to 44.5 million tonnes this year.
We're really happy and optimistic about this year. Yeah, it'd be nice to have a couple of good ones back to back.
But head west and the optimism wanes, with growers in WA still desperate for a decent shower.
So we've got a few dry patches and we've got some good patches. And even the good patches like here is reasonably good, but it's still dry.
Despite the difference in rainfall between the west and the east of Australia, in every grain-producing state, the area planted to winter crops is up.
It's been a big improvement from last year.
A rebound that's been most pronounced in the states hardest hit by drought.
Last year, New South Wales around 2 million tonnes, and we're at this stage forecasting they'll get up around 8 million tonnes this year.
Forecasts of a wetter than average winter have also been welcome, and while there may not be as much rain as the Bureau first thought, some farmers aren't too worried.
20 to 30 mils of rain during the spring is probably all that we're going to need.
That could be all the difference between a good harvest and a bad one. Clint Jasper, ABC News.
Rugby Australia has announced the details of its revised National Super Rugby competition, which will kick off in July. Each of the 5 teams will play each other twice in a round-robin format over 10 weeks. Then the top 3 teams face off in a 2-week final series in September. The first match between the New South Wales Waratahs and Queensland Reds will be played in Brisbane on July the 3rd. The next day, the ACT Brumbies will take on the Melbourne Rebels in Canberra. Perth's Western Force will come back into the competition. They'll play their first game in the second round. All matches will be played without crowds and broadcast on pay TV. Time to check the weather now, and it was a miserable start to the day in Sydney, Graham.
Yeah, it certainly was. We had a real mix of low cloud, fog, some drizzle. That broke up into showers as the day progressed, but it was the humidity that kept this cloud cover very low across Sydney. As I said, many areas also saw fog. It took a long time to clear up because we also had quite a lot of cloud above it. You can see that grey to the top of the picture there. And that helped block any heating, which is what we needed to see that cloud and fog dissipate. Now, that humidity and the cloud cover also kept our minimum temperatures about 6 degrees warmer than usual for June. Our tops were sitting mostly within about a degree of average. Across the state, Mudgee and Tenterfield were 8 degrees warmer than usual overnight, but clear skies further west and south resulted in minimums 3 to 6 degrees below average. Despite some falls of 10 to 20 millimetres about parts of the coast overnight, only a couple of locations have recorded half the usual monthly rainfall for June so far. The cloud about the east of the state is with a surface trough. This is sitting near the coast at the moment. It's also an upper cold pool moving through the north of the state. And both these systems are expected to move offshore overnight. The trough itself should continue to move further east in a weakening mode. The showers will contract north. That's ahead of an increasing inland instability, ahead of a cold front and trough set to move over the state through the weekend. Now, cold front and low will bring widespread showers and thunderstorms to the west coast. That includes Perth and a few showers in Hobart and Brisbane. The showers for us will tend isolated and light. They'll gradually contract to the coast overnight, then up to the mid-north coast and northern rivers as we move through tomorrow afternoon. So in the northeast, the tablelands and the upper Hunter will be mostly dry but partly cloudy. The showers will linger about the remainder of the coast, but gradually contracting north through the day. Winds on the waters will tend southerly as we move through the morning. Now, for the southeast, widespread areas of fog, some frost, mostly on the southern ranges, then a dry, mostly sunny day. Now, that's apart from a little bit of cloud and an isolated shower about the Blue Mountains. We've also got that southwesterly wind change on the waters as we move through the morning. And over the inland, widespread areas of fog at first, some cloud in the south afterwards. Mostly sunny in the north with light winds throughout. We'll probably see a fairly broad area of fog over parts of the inland as well. Now, that southwesterly wind change should move through the waters by around the middle of the day. Our overnight lows will range from 8 to 13 and our tops should reach about 18 to 21. The morning fog will be fairly widespread, but then we should see that clear up to a partly cloudy day. It should be mostly dry. Really, the potential of any isolated showers just sits along the coast in the morning. In a similar scenario, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, possible coastal showers. Really, for the most part, Friday and Saturday will be dry, but Sunday, Juanita should see a return of the showers across Sydney.
Thanks for that, Graham. Lee Sales is here now with 7:30.
Hello and welcome. Tonight, the